Queen Isabella of Arenthia was known for her beauty, grace, and iron will. Yet beneath her jeweled crown lay a heart bound by chains of duty. She had married King Alderd not for love, but for power, a union forged by politics and sealed with cold vows. For years, she sat beside him at banquets, smiling as her heart grew quieter with each passing season. Then came Adrian, a poet hired to entertain the court. His words were like fire on parchment, bold, dangerous, alive. In him, Isabella saw something she had long forgotten: freedom. They met beneath moonlit arches, their whispers lost to the night. The queen risked everything: her throne, her crown, her life, for moments that made her feel human again. When their affair was discovered, Adrian was sentenced to execution. But Isabella defied her counsel. She removed her crown before the court, cast it at the king's feet, and declared she would rather die in love than live in a golden prison. Together, she and Adrian fled the castle and vanished into the wilds.
Years later, travelers spoke of a humble cottage deep in the mountains,
where an aging poet and a woman with royal eyes lived quietly, free. At last, Sister Beatrice entered the convent at 18, her life devoted to silence, service, and the sacred. The abbey was cold and unyielding, its walls echoing with prayers that never reached her heart. But when Father Lucien arrived, a young priest with gentle eyes and a voice that trembled with compassion, something within her awakened. They met under the guise of confession. Her whispered sins turned into shared secrets. He spoke of the burden of vows, the ache of isolation, and soon their faith became entangled with forbidden desire. Nights grew longer, candles burned lower, and the chapel became their only refuge. When the bishop uncovered their secret, the punishment was merciless. Father Lucien was exiled to a distant monastery, never to return. Beatrice was imprisoned in a silent cell, denied light, speech, or prayer. Yet even in darkness, she held on to a single rose he had given her, dried and fragile, but eternal in meaning. Decades later, when she died, the sisters found that same rose pressed to her heart. No one spoke of it aloud, but every woman in that convent knew love had found its way even into the house of God and left a mark that holiness could not erase. Princess Alara lived in a castle of gold, where every smile was rehearsed and every breath measured by royal command. Her father, King Ilarion, ruled with power and pride, seeing his daughter as a political tool, a bride to be bartered, not a soul to be One stormy night, she met Rohan, the stable boy who dared to speak to her like an equal. His laughter, his courage, and his rough, honest hands drew her in. Over time, friendship turned into affection, and affection into a dangerous love. They met in hidden corners, exchanged secret notes, and dreamed of running away to a world where love did not bow to titles. When the king discovered their affair, he ordered Rowan's public execution. Desperate, Alara disguised herself as a maid and freed him from his cell. Together, they fled through forests and rivers, hunted by royal soldiers.
Legend says they reached the border, but were caught in a flood. Their bodies never found.
The king built a chapel on the riverbank in her memory, and each spring, roses bloomed there. Red as her heart, untamed as the love she died to protect, Lady Eleanor of Arundel lived in a fortress of obedience. Her father ruled her life with unbending pride, arranging a marriage she never wanted. But one fateful summer, a knight named Sir Cedri arrived, brave, loyal, and kind. Their souls met like fire and wind, igniting a love neither could admit aloud. They could not meet in the open, so they began to write. Each night, Eleanor slipped her letters into a crack behind the great tapestry in the West Hall. Each morning, Cedric retrieved them, leaving his own in return. Words became their world, words of love, longing, and promises of escape. When war broke out, Cedric rode into battle with her last letter close to his heart. He never returned. 4 years, Eleanor continued writing to him, filling the castle walls with her sorrow. When she died, she asked to be buried beside that wall, her final letter still unfinished. Centuries later, during renovations, workers discovered the hidden letters, hundreds of them, untouched by time. Historians called it tragedy. But those who read their words called it proof that love can outlive even stone, silence, and death. Lady Margaret of Greymoor was the daughter of a warlord. Her family's feud with the Blackwoods had lasted generations. Blood for blood, vow for vow. But fate betrayed her when she met Sir Alaric Blackwood, the enemy knight captured during battle. Instead of hatred, she saw courage in his eyes, honor in his words. She visited him in secret, bringing food and conversation. What began as mercy grew into something neither could deny. Within those prison walls, love blossomed, fierce and forbidden. When her brother discovered the affair, he vowed to kill Alaric to restore their family's honor. Margaret tried to flee with her lover, but soldiers found them before dawn. Alaric fought valiantly, defending her until the last breath. As he died in her arms, he whispered, "Let the war end with me." In her grief, Margaret locked herself in her chambers for weeks. When she emerged, she renounced her title and entered a convent, devoting her life to peace. Generations later, her diary was found filled with poems to the man her family called an enemy, but she called her heart. And to this day, the hills of Greymoor are said to echo with her weeping. Lady Rosamond of Winthon was born into privilege, her life planned from the moment she took her first breath. At 16, her father promised her to Lord Edmund, a man twice her age and void of warmth. Rosamond's heart, however, belonged to another, Tristan, a humble scribe who spent his days copying manuscripts in the castle library. They met by chance, but their connection was instant to souls bound by poetry, not status. Each secret encounter deepened their love, though they knew discovery meant ruin. When the day of her wedding arrived, Rosamond stood before the altar, her hands trembling. And when the priest spoke her vows, she turned away. That night, dressed in rags, she fled through the castle gates and into the storm, finding Tristan waiting with 2 horses. Together, they rode into the unknown, hunted by guards and condemned by family. Years later, travelers spoke of a school hidden in the forest, where a kind woman taught children to read, and a quiet man wrote books by candlelight. No one knew their names, but those who saw them swore love had given them the courage to rewrite their destiny. In the bustling kingdom of Evermere, a young peasant named Leora worked in the royal kitchens. Her life was ordinary until the day she accidentally spilled wine on Prince Adon. She fell to her knees in fear, expecting punishment. But instead, he laughed, a sound she would never forget. Curiosity grew into friendship, and friendship into something far more dangerous. They met in the stables under moonlight, where Aiden would remove his crown and speak to her as an equal. For the first time, both felt free from their worlds. She from poverty, he from duty. When the court discovered their secret, Aiden was forced to choose between the throne and the girl he loved. He chose her. The king disowned him, stripping him of his title and wealth. Together, they escaped into exile, surviving on the kindness of strangers. Years later, when the old king died, Aiden was offered the throne once more. He refused. "A crown weighs heavier than love," he said. And so, a prince became a farmer, and a peasant became his queen, proving that not all fairy tales end in castles. But in freedom in the cold fortress of Darnell Keep, Lady Evelyn lived under the watch of her cruel husband, a lord feared for his temper and thirst for control. She had married him at 15. Her spirit crushed by years of silence. But everything changed the day she met Rowan, a blacksmith who worked in the castle forge. He spoke to her not as a lady, but as a woman, with respect, warmth, and daring honesty. Their secret began with glances, then letters, then stolen moments in the darkness of the forge. Each time, she risked everything, her status, her safety, her life. When her husband discovered the affair, he ordered Rowan's execution and locked Evelyn in her chambers. But before the sentence could be carried out, the castle mysteriously caught fire. Witnesses claimed they saw a cloaked woman riding away in the smoke, her eyes glowing with tears and determination. No one ever found them, but legends say a smith and his noble wife built a home deep in the woods. with a hammer's song and a woman's laughter echoed a sound that even death couldn't silence. The kingdom of Thaloria was at peace, bound by treaties and royal bloodlines, but within its walls, love was a weapon waiting to strike. Princess Mirren, heir to the throne, was meant to marry the prince of a rival land, to seal an alliance, yet her heart belonged to Kale, her personal guard, loyal, fierce, and utterly forbidden. For years, their love burned in secret. They met in candlelit corridors, writing messages in invisible ink and hiding them within books of prayer. But fate has a cruel hand. On the eve of her arranged wedding, their secret was betrayed. Kale was captured, and Mirren was forced to watch as he was dragged before the court. In desperation, she declared her love publicly. Defying her father and the council, chaos erupted. The alliance was broken, and war followed. Both kingdoms fell into ruin, their peace consumed by vengeance. Yet, amidst the ashes, stories survived of a princess who gave up her crown for a guard who gave up his life. Their love destroyed a kingdom, but their names became legend, a warning and a promise that true love cannot serve two masters' power and the heart. Lady Chalene of Lornwall was born into the heart of power. Her husband, Lord Richard, was a man of ambition and cruelty, a key advisor to the king. Their marriage was nothing more than a contract of status. But Chalene's heart found its rebellion in a most dangerous place. The arms of Sir Gareth, a knight sworn to protect her husband. They met in stolen hours, their passion hidden beneath the veil of duty. Each moment together was a betrayal not only of vows but of the crown itself. For Garrick possessed secrets, letters, and plans that could shift the balance of power in the realm. When their affair was exposed, Lord Richard sought revenge. Garrick was accused of treason and executed. But before his deaths, he entrusted Chalene with documents that revealed a web of corruption within the royal courts.
Chalene delivered them to the king herself, bringing down her husband and changing the course of the kingdom.
Though history remembers her as a widow and a reformer, the truth lies buried with Garrick's name. The knight whose love gave her courage to defy tyranny and shape the future with heartbreak as her crown. Lady Adeline of Ravencourt was born into nobility, destined for a future of silks and ceremonies. But all the gold in her father's castle could not buy her happiness. Her heart belonged to Thomas, a kind-hearted falconer whose laughter reached her window long before he ever dared to speak to her.
Their love began in secret messages hidden inside falcon feathers, meetings in the gardens after midnight.
He taught her to fly hawks. She taught him to read.
But their bond could not stay hidden forever.
When her father discovered the affair, he gave her two choices: marry the duke he had chosen or see Thomas hanged for seducing a noblewoman. On the morning of the wedding, Adeline walked to the altar in silence. But when the priest asked if she took the duke as her husband, she turned to the guests and declared, "I take no man but the one I love." She tore off her veil, threw down her crown, and fled. She found Thomas waiting by the stables, and together they escaped into exile. Years later, travelers spoke of a woman who traded her title for love, living simply, yet richer than any queen.
Brother Alaric had lived half his life behind monastery walls, his soul devoted to God, his days ruled by silence.
Until one winter's eve, when a noble woman named Seraphine sought refuge from a storm.
She arrived, trembling, her cloak torn, her eyes filled with sorrow.
He offered her warmth, food, and safety. But what began as compassion soon became temptation. Each day, she told him stories of the world beyond the cloister of rivers, music, and love. Alaric listened with a hunger he could not name. When she wept for her lost husband, he reached for her hand. That single touch shattered years of devotion. They met in secret for months, hearts bound by both love and guilt. When the abbot discovered them, Seraphine was cast out, and Alaric was sentenced to lifelong penance. He lived in silence, but his heart never repented. After his death, monks found a hidden chamber beneath his cell, and within it, hundreds of parchment pages written in his hand, all signed with her name. To this day, they remain locked in the abbey, sealed by the words he wrote. If loving her was sin, then let my soul burn gladly. Queen Evelina ruled beside her husband, King Roderick, a man of strategy and steel. Their marriage was one of power, not passion. Her loneliness became a shadow until she met Arlen, a young general whose loyalty and courage stirred something long buried in her heart. Their connection grew in stolen moments, behind council curtains, in whispered meetings before battle. He was her strength when the king was cruel, her solace when the crown felt heavy. But love between a queen and her subject was treason, punishable by death.
When the king discovered their affair, he unleashed war upon Arlen's family, declaring them traitors. Arlen raised an army in defense, and soon the realm was torn apart.
In the final siege, Evelina stood atop the castle walls, watching as her husband's forces burned everything she loved. When the battle ended, both men lay dead, one by sword, one by betrayal. Evelina vanished that night, leaving behind her crown and her throne. Some say she took her own life beside Arlen's grave. Others claim she became a wandering healer, tending to the wounded from the war she caused. Her story endures, not as a queen's downfall, but as a woman's rebellion for love. In the heart of medieval France, Lady Juliet was promised to a wealthy duke, a union arranged to strengthen her family's power. But fate intervened when she met Father Damien, a young priest known for his kindness and intellect. Their connection began through letters, debates about faith, philosophy, and the meaning of love. Soon, their words became confessions of the heart. Juliet would visit the church at dusk, her veil drawn low, and there, between candlelight and silence, they surrendered to forbidden desire.
But the walls of the confessional have ears.
Their secret reached both the bishop and the duke, and punishment was swift. Father Damien was condemned to death for blasphemy. Juliet was locked in a convent for life. On the morning of his execution, she escaped her cell and ran through the rain to see him one last time. Witnesses say she broke through the crowd, clutching his hand as he was led to the gallows. "Love is not sin," she cried. "It is salvation." They were torn apart, but her words echoed through the crowd, words that would outlive both church and crown. Duchess Helena of Montclair was known across kingdoms for her beauty, but behind her elegance lay despair. Her husband, the Duke, was a tyrant, cruel, jealous, and unfaithful. Her only joy came from her secret friendship with Elias, the royal physician, a man of knowledge and quiet compassion. He treated her bruises, listened to her fears, and slowly became her reason to endure.
Love grew between them, delicate but unstoppable.
They planned to escape to a distant land where titles and bloodlines held no power. But on the eve of their flight, the Duke discovered their secret. Elias was imprisoned and sentenced to execution at dawn. Helena drugged her guards, stole the dungeon keys, and freed him under the cover of night. Together, they vanished into the storm, never to be seen again. Weeks later, the Duke's men found 2 horses near the cliffs, one cloak embroidered with the Duchess's crest lying beside the sea. Some said they drowned together. Others believed they fled to another kingdom. Centuries later, sailors swore they saw a ghostly woman by the shore, whispering the name Elias into the wind, forever searching for the love she refused to lose.
Lady Isola of Varennes was the king's most trusted courtier, loyal, graceful, and silent. But her heart hid a treasonous secret.
For months, she had been meeting with Lord Thorne, the rebel leader waging war against her king. What began as negotiations turned into something neither of them expected. Love born in the midst of betrayal. Their meetings took place under the guise of diplomacy, in moonlit forests and abandoned abbeys. He spoke of justice. She spoke of peace. Somewhere between ideals and stolen glances, their hearts intertwined, yet both knew the cost. If the king discovered her secret, death would be merciful. When Thorne was captured, the king ordered his public execution to make an example of him. Isolde stood beside the throne, her face pale but her resolve unbroken. Just as the blade was raised, she confessed her love before the entire court. "He is not your enemy," she cried. "He is my heart." The court fell silent. The king's rage was swift. Both were sentenced to die. But on the morning of the execution, Their cells were found empty. Some claimed they escaped across the sea.
Others whispered that they died together in the tunnels beneath the castle, their love sealed forever in darkness.
The war between the kingdoms of Orin and Thaler had raged for decades, filling fields with graves and hearts with hatred. Yet in the midst of it, love dared to bloom. Arya, a healer from Orin, was captured during a border raid. Wounded soldiers filled the enemy's camp, and she was forced to tend to them.
Among them was Captain Darius of Thalor, the man whose army had burned her village.
But when she looked into his eyes, she saw not cruelty, but remorse. He treated her with kindness, protecting her from soldiers who mocked her. Slowly, compassion turned to love, and love to defiance. They dreamed of peace, but fate was merciless. When the Wool Council discovered their secret, Darius was branded a traitor. He was ordered to execute her himself to prove his loyalty.
Instead, he turned his sword on his own men, cutting a path through chaos.
Arya fled with him, but an arrow struck Darius before they reached the forest. She carried him into the trees, holding him as the sun rose. He died whispering, "If another life exists, find me there." And in the valley where he fell, red flowers still bloom. Locals call them the lover's blood. Clara was a servant in the grand halls of Silvermere, a castle ruled by greed and pride. She spent her days scrubbing floors and fetching wine, unseen by nobles. But one day, she caught the eye of Sir Julian, a knight known for his honor and bravery. Their worlds could not have been farther apart. Yet in the quiet corners of the castle, they found comfort in each other's company. He would sneak into the kitchens at night, pretending to search for food, only to speak to her. Their laughter echoed through the halls, hidden beneath the noise of the court. When the Lady of Silvermere discovered their love, she felt her pride wounded more than her heart. In a rage, she accused Clara of witchcraft, the easiest way to rid herself of a servant who had touched what was hers. Sir Julian tried to defend her, but the court was deaf to mercy. Clara was burned at the stake, her eyes fixed on him until the end. He vanished that night, abandoning his knighthood and sword. Years later, villagers spoke of a cloaked man who visited her grave each full moon, leaving a single white rose, a vow that love would never die, even when she had. In the medieval city of Rowanport, laws were strict, especially for women of the lower class. Love was a privilege reserved for the noble. Yet, Lucia, a humble baker's daughter, fell for Captain Tristone, the royal guard sworn to protect the Duke's family. They met when she delivered bread to the castle kitchens. His smile, his laughter, they melted her fear. Weeks turned to months, and soon, stolen glances turned into hidden meetings in the alleys by moonlight. But when rumors reached the Duke, Lucia was arrested and accused of seducing a soldier above her station, a crime punishable by death. Tristan begged the Duke for mercy, offering his sword, his rank, even his life. But Lucia was still sentenced to hang. On the day of the execution, she stood in the square, the crowd silent. Tristan pushed through the guards, climbed the platform, and kissed her before everyone sealing his own fate. They were executed side by side, hands intertwined. The townspeople later buried them together beneath a willow tree. When spring came, 2 roses, one red, one white, grew from the same stem. To this day, lovers in Rowanport place flowers there, whispering, "One kiss is worth eternity." Lady Cassandra of Dornhelm was renowned for her beauty and intelligence. Married at 17 to Lord Garin, a man thrice her age. She played the perfect wife in public, while her soul withered in silence. But her loneliness ended when she met Elias, her husband's squire, young, bold, and utterly devoted to her. What began as secret glances turned into a fire neither could control. They met in the stables, the scent of hay and candle wax, their only witnesses. But passion has a way of drawing eyes, and soon whispers reach the wrong ears.
Lord Garin discovered the affair and swore vengeance.
He ordered Elias to be executed, and Cassandra locked away. On the night before his death, Elias broke free from his cell, storming the great hall with sword in hand. He fought his way to Cassandra, but the guards overwhelmed him. As he fell, she took his dagger and ended her own life beside him. Their blood mingled on the marble floor, red proof of love's rebellion. Garen's house fell into ruin, and generations later, travelers swore they could still hear their voices in the old halls, whispering promises death could not silence. Sister Eleanor had spent 10 years behind the stone walls of St. Mirabel Abbey, devoted to silence, prayer, and obedience. Her heart was still, until the day a wounded soldier was brought to the convent gates. His name was Rohan, a knight fallen in battle. Assigned to tend his wounds, Eleanor felt her faith tremble with every heartbeat she shared beside him. His voice was soft but full of life. Everything the abbey denied her. He spoke of the world beyond the walls. Forests, music, the sea. Slowly, devotion turned to desire. They met in secret beneath the chapel, whispering vows no priest would bless. But when the Mother Superior discovered their sin, she denounced Eleanor as a heretic. Rohan was seized by the church guard. His punishment, death by sword. Eleanor fled the abbey to save him, but arrived too late. As dawn broke, she found his lifeless body and fell to her knees, placing her rosary over his heart. "God forgive me," she whispered, "for I have loved." That night, she vanished into the woods. Some say she joined a wandering band of outlaws. Others claim the abbey bells still ring by themselves, calling the name of the nun who loved too deeply. Mira was a handmaiden in the royal court, born to serve and remain unseen. But the Prince Alaric noticed her when no one else did. She was the one who brought him water, who tied the cords of his cloak, who listened when his own blood conspired against him. Their secret began with words, then glances, then midnight meetings in the gardens, where roses climbed the palace walls. She taught him humility. He gave her hope. But the king had already arranged his marriage to a foreign princess, a union meant to secure peace. When the king's spies discovered Alaric's affair, Mira was accused of treason. The punishment was swift. Death by hanging. Alaric begged his father for mercy, but love was weakness in a kingdom built on pride. On the day of her execution, the prince disguised himself among the crowd, his hood pulled low. As the rope tightened, he cut her free with his dagger. They escaped into the forest, chased by guards, never to be seen again. Decades later, travelers claimed to see an old couple in a hidden cottage deep in the woods, a man with royal eyes and a woman with calloused hands, still calling each other my heart. Lydia lived at the edge of a small medieval village, gathering herbs and tending goats. Her days were simple, until Brother Cedric arrived. He was a monk from the monastery on the hill, sent to preach humility. But when their eyes met in the marketplace, neither could look away. Their meetings began as confessions, she seeking guidance, he offering it. But soon his sermons turned to poetry, his prayers to longing. The vows he had taken, chastity, silence, devotion, became chains around his heart. They met in a ruined chapel beyond the forest, where moss grew on old stone and candles burned in secret. When a fellow monk followed him one night and saw them together, Cedric was dragged back to the monastery and sentenced to life imprisonment. Lydia tried to plead for him, but no one listened. On the eve of his punishment, she broke into the monastery, cloaked in darkness, and freed him. They fled across the countryside, but the church's reach was long. Guards caught them near the river. Lydia was killed instantly. Cedric, in despair, leaped into the water to join her. The next morning, their bodies were gone. Only 2 sets of footprints led to the riverbank, ending where the mist began. Duchess Evelina of Montclair had everything: wealth, power, and the envy of the entire court. Yet her heart was an empty chamber, echoing with loneliness. That changed when Tomas entered her life, a young stable hand with fire in his eyes and honesty in his voice. He was beneath her by every law of the realm, yet she found herself drawn to him. He treated her not as a duchess, but as a woman. He spoke freely, laughed without fear. They met in the stables after midnight, where the smell of hay mixed with stolen kisses. But secrets cannot stay buried forever. Her husband, Duke Alaric, discovered the affair and swore vengeance. Tomas was whipped and thrown into the dungeons. Evelina pleaded for mercy, offering her fortune, her title. Everything but the Duke refused. The next morning, she poisoned his wine and freed Tomas. They fled on horseback under the cover of fog. The Duke's guards closed behind. They were never caught. Years later, villagers whispered of a small house by the cliffs where a noble woman and a peasant lived in peace. Some said they had a child, proof that love could defy even the cruelest chains of class. Princess Serafina Valthor was born with the weight of a crown on her head. She was to marry the prince of a rival kingdom, a union meant to end generations of war. But on the night before her wedding, she met a foreign envoy, a warrior named Kale, from a conquered land her people once destroyed. He despised her lineage, yet her compassion disarmed him. Their conversations became longer, their silences heavier. Soon, Seraphine risked everything to meet him in secret beneath the castle. When her father discovered their forbidden love, Kale was condemned to die. Desperate, Seraphine opened the palace gates in the dead of night, allowing his people to storm the fortress and rescue him. The attack succeeded, but it cost her everything. Her father was slain, her crown lost, her name cursed in every hall of the realm. She fled with Kale into exile, living as a fugitive among those her kingdom once enslaved. Years later, ballads called her the Princess of the Lost Crown. Some cursed her for treason. Others said she was the only royal who ever chose love over power. And in forgotten songs, her name still means freedom. Lady Rosalind was known as the most loyal wife in the kingdom, married to Sir Edmund, a war hero and champion of the crown. But when her husband went to war, she was left alone in a castle surrounded by soldiers in silence. Among them was a captured enemy knight, Lucian, her husband's sworn foe. Assigned to oversee his imprisonment, Rosalind visited his cell each day, ensuring he was fed and tended. But as weeks turned to months, pity became compassion, and compassion turned to love. Lucian was unlike the brutal men she knew. He was gentle, poetic, and honorable in defeat. When word came that her husband was returning, Rosalind faced a terrible choice. If Lucian remained, he would be executed. That night, she opened his cell and gave him her husband's horse to escape. When Sir Edmund learned of her betrayal, he ordered her locked away for life. But when guards went to fetch her, her chambers were empty, the window rope torn from the wall. Years later, travelers spoke of a woman and a man living by a quiet lake across the border, a lady who once betrayed her kingdom, and the knight who swore to protect her forever. Amara was a palace made invisible, obedient, and poor. The king never knew her name until one winter morning when she saved his life. A rebel assassin had poisoned his wine, but Amara, seeing his cup shimmer oddly, stopped him just in time. In gratitude, the king summoned her to his private chambers. He expected loyalty, but found love instead. Amara's honesty and courage stirred something no noble woman ever had. Soon, their secret meetings became the heart of his lonely nights. But love between a king and a servant was blasphemy. When the queen's spies uncovered the affair, Amara was accused of witchcraft. Her influence, they claimed, was not love, but sorcery. She was sentenced to burn. On the day of her execution, the king disguised himself as a guard, rode through the crowd, and cut her free. Together they escaped the palace as flames rose behind them. The king never returned to his throne. Years later, when war broke out, songs were sung of a ruler who abandoned his crown for a common girl, a king who chose love over power, and a maid whose heart was worth more than gold. In the northern highlands, where women learned to wield swords as well as men, lived a warrior named Isla. Fierce and proud, she led her clan against invading forces from the south. During one raid, she captured a foreign prince named Adrian Proud, intelligent and unbroken. Her duty was to ransom him, but fate had other plans. They argued over honor and war, but slowly, their hatred gave way to understanding. He saw in her not a savage, but a soul bound by duty. She saw in him not an enemy, but a man of passion and kindness. When his ransom arrived, Isla refused to give him up. Her clan called her traitor. Her own brother turned against her. Yet she stood her ground, saying, "I would rather die beside my enemy than live without my heart." They fled into the mountains, hunted by both kingdoms. Legends say they died in an avalanche, locked in each other's arms. But some believe they crossed the sea together, building a new life far from the wars that once divided them. Even now, in those same mountains, locals whisper that when the wind howls, it carries her battle cry and his name. Lena was the daughter of a humble blacksmith, her hands rough from work and her dress stained with ash. She never imagined that a prince would notice her, but one evening, when his horse threw a shoe near her father's forge, fate intervened. Prince Damien watched in awe as Lena took command of the fire, hammering with strength and grace. He returned often, pretending his horse needed repairs, just to see her. Their friendship grew into secret affection. But love between a prince and a commoner was forbidden. When his father found out, he ordered Lena imprisoned and Damien betrothed to a noble heiress. The night before his wedding, Damien disguised himself as a servant and broke into the dungeon.
He freed Lena, and together they fled under the silver light of the moon.
Soldiers pursued them across the valley, but their tracks vanished near the river. Years later, a traveling bard told of a hidden forge deep in the woods, where a woman with ash-streaked hair worked beside a man with royal eyes. They made swords not for war, but for lovers, each blade inscribed with the words, "Love is the truest rebellion." Lady Celeste had lost everything, her husband to war, her home to debt, her hope to grief. She lived alone in a crumbling manor, until one stormy night, a wandering knight knocked on her door seeking shelter. His name was Tristan. A man scarred by battle but gentle in spirit. They shared stories by the fire of loss, of love, of faith broken and found again. As days passed, their bond deepened. For the first time in years, Celeste laughed again. But Tristan carried a secret. He was the man who had slain her husband in battle. When he confessed, she froze in disbelief. He fell to his knees, offering his sword and his life. Yet as she looked into his tearful eyes, she saw not an enemy, but a soul as wounded as hers. Instead of vengeance, she chose forgiveness. Together they rebuilt her home and their hearts.
When they died years later, villagers buried them side by side, beneath a single stone engraved with only 2 words.
Forgave, loved. And in that simple inscription lived the greatest act of love of all. One that defied hate, grief, and the very laws of man.